the Dia do Fico, the I Will Stay Day, was a Masonic supported event. And Dom Pedro I stayed here and went to São Paulo, to the Ipiranga, to proclaim the independence. Independence of or death. Why? Why São Paulo? As I said, São Paulo is prone to succession, to real freedom. He came here, Dom Pedro, to organize a repression against any attempt of São Paulo to separate from Brazil, and that's what he did in his whole reign, in his whole period, to repress any succession movement. The Ecuador Confederation, he executed Frei Caneca, almost a libertarian Catholic priest. He even tried to make Uruguay part of Brazil during the questions of the Rio de Plata, the Cisplatinus War. Thanks God, Uruguay and Argentina defeated us, and Uruguay is now an independent country, but it was not a complete defeat. Brazil was able, during the peace negotiations, to seize the missionary territories, Sete Povos das Missões, 7 peoples of the missions. Well, pure centralization, centralization and more centralization. And then we had his son, Dom Pedro II. There is a big conservative movement in Brazil, a monarchist movement, that they love the Orleans and Bragança family. They are so misguided. Dom Pedro II's reign was a disaster. I will explain you why. First, he was against the Catholic Church. He stayed as an allied. He allied himself with the Freemasons against the Catholic Church during the religious questions, even forbidding the formation of priests. And he promoted a massive migration of Protestants. I don't have problems with Protestants, but with massive migration. And Protestants were not part of the Brazilian original cultural matrix that was composed by natives, blacks from Africa, and Catholic Europeans. That was not part of the scheme. Mass migration is always bad. The worst of them is the Muslim. Well, another thing, he ended homestead. United States has a lot of capital and prosperity because of homestead. In Brazil, during Dom Pedro II, there was the law of the land of 1850, which prohibited any form of acquiring land except if you purchase the land from the government. Then we have a big agrarian issue here, and the leftists blame capitalism for that. Bullshit. Another thing, the Lei dos Entraves, the obstacle law, as I would translate that, when Dom Pedro II instituted a lot of red tape in Brazil, a bureaucratic regulatory empire, which resulted in the substitution of natural economic elites. They were replaced by a bureaucratic elite, a notarial fiefdom. Today, anything you want to do, every entrepreneur must spend a lot of time and energy to go to a notarial office to fill out paper shit. That's very bad to our economy. So, to understand what happened during the imperial period, we must look to the clientelism, another big cultural aspect of the Iberian civilization. We like to give privileges to friends. That's bad because it violates the natural rights of people who are not our friends. On the other hand, it's good because we protect the natural rights of our friends against positive law, against the expansion of the state power. Dom Pedro II kind of destroyed the good side of clientelism by promoting his friends against a natural elite. Big entrepreneurs, for example. I would say Barão de Mauá, but there were many others. The fact is that there is one thing that is even worse than the empire, and it's called republic. The Republic is even worse. Look at the empire. I don't like Dom Pedro II, but Brazil was as rich and has as much prestige as European countries, as America. Manaus in Amazon was called the Paris of the tropics. Rio de Janeiro, the imperial capital, was called the land of the pianos because we had a lot of high culture. Today we have funk. What happened? Damn, I hate the Republic. According to the historian Jorge Caldeira, we had more than 500,000 small and medium enterprises in Brazil. Industries, commerce. We were the 4th economy in the world. We had the 2nd best military navy in the world, and we were the 1st in railroad construction. Railroads are excellent. But then came the goddamn Republic. Another Freemason plan. Well, why Republic? They were racist and they supported slavery. We abolished slavery in 1888 by a decree of Princess Isabel. She was a member of the royal family, that's true, but she was a good woman, maybe even a saint. And she abolished slavery. She didn't do that alone. We had a lot of abolitionists, Joaquim Nabuco, Chico da Matilde, and of course the Catholic Church. But the abolition enraged many sectors of society, which automatically started supporting a republic. They were called the Republicans of the May 13th, the day of the abolition. The Republic was a coup d'etat conducted by the Brazilian army. Let's look now to the history of the Brazilian army. They say that the origins of the Brazilian army remounts to the Battle of Guararapes, but dude, that happened in the 17th century against Netherlands. It was just a union of forces of many ethnicities, Indians, blacks, against the Netherlands invader. That has nothing to do with the racist, positivist, Masonic army that conducted the Republican coup. They were influenced. They were influenced by people like Augusto Conte, Benjamin Constant. Benjamin Constant was terrible. He introduced a lot of positivist ideas in the military ranks by his theory of not a citizen soldier, such as in America, but a soldier citizen. A soldier that first complied to the rule of the Republic. That's another curse of Brazil. And then we had the military presidents. That's why this period is called the Republic of the Sword. It was terrible. The first president was Marechal Deodoro da Fonseca. During his government, we had the first big economic crisis. Encilhamento. Why the crisis happened? Ask an Austrian economist. Same thing as always. They don't learn from history. Visconde de Ouro Preto, a viscount in Brazil, created a primitive form of central banking, while Councillor Marinki passed a law in the middle of the night that authorized massive emission of public bonds and expansion of credit without saving. We had the first hyperinflation. The same story. The Austrian economists always get right, but they don't take them seriously. Why? Because the establishment controlled the universities, of course. Then we had the Floriano Peixoto, another military president. Floriano Peixoto was terrible. He supported a positivist politician called Júlio de Castilhos against a federalist revolution in the south. De Castilhos influenced a young man called Getúlio Vargas, which became the worst Brazilian ever born. I will talk about him later. Then we had Prudente de Moraes, a criminal. During Prudente de Moraes' government, we had Antônio Conselheiro, Anthony the Counselor. This is a great Brazilian hero, Antônio Conselheiro. He assembled a Catholic libertarian community, separatist, called the Canudos. And the Canudos bravely resisted 3 attempts of the Brazilian army to destroy them. Unfortunately, they brought heavy artillery, etc., and Prudente de Moraes and the army destroyed the Canudos community. More centralization. Afonso Pena started with another economic curse in the Brazilian thinking, that is the price control. During the Taubaté conventions, they decided to burn coffee to force the prices up. Price control. That wrecked our economy during the whole 20th century. And that's the legacy of the old republic. But there is even worse than the old republic. Getúlio Vargas onwards. But before Getúlio Vargas, let's look to the government of Arthur Bernardes. During Arthur Bernardes, we had a rebellion against the oligarchies. During the old republic, we had an alternation of power between the oligarchies of Minas Gerais and the oligarchies of São Paulo, coffee producers in São Paulo and milk producers in Minas. The tenentism was a rebellion of young officers, lieutenants and captains against this oligarchic system. But they were influenced by Illuminist, positivist, socialist, syndicalist ideologies, all the leftist crap, all the progressive crap. They rebelled and they merged all this ideological crap into a movement called Aliança Liberal, Liberal Alliance, suggestive name, which promoted Getúlio Vargas. Getúlio Vargas became a dictator in the new state of the 1930s, the 30 Revolution. Once again, São Paulo, we never surrendered, dude. We rebelled. The movement in 1932, the Constitutional Revolution. What Getúlio Vargas did? He put Brazilians to kill Brazilians. He invaded São Paulo. It was a big war, and unfortunately we lost. But we never surrendered. Getúlio Vargas destroyed the land of Holy Cross, the natural Brasility. He burned the flags of the provinces in a freaking pyre. And then he waved the satanic positivist flag of nowadays, Ordem e Progresso, Order and Progress, and Augusto Conte motto. His interventions against economic and individual freedoms are so massive that it would require a video, a live just for that. I will not enter in this detail, but he was a communist son of a bitch. And he introduced the New World Order to Brazil by allying himself with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's Getúlio Vargas. And the problem is the ghost of Getúlio Vargas, banned from paradise, but too much of a bitch to go to hell, keeps haunting Brazil until today, like Peronism haunts Argentina. Every single leader, every single political movement after Getúlio are Getulists. Even a thinker that people say is the most conservative thinker in Brazil, Olavo de Carvalho, he suffers from the disease of Getulism in his economic thought, in his economic thinking. After Getúlio Vargas, we had Juscelino Kubitschek. And Juscelino Kubitschek explored the short-sightedness of the Brazilian people who wants everything falling from heaven, everything easy, immediatism. Juscelino used to say, we need 50 years of development in 5. That's the same rhetoric of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the communist president who is in prison. He always say, growing plan, growth plan. Brazil now going to take off. You remember the Christ the Redeemer, like a rocket plummeting into the sky. Easy money, easy money, easy money. But they don't understand the economic basics. You must save to invest. You must work to consume. We don't get it, dude. Well, After Getúlio, the American Freemasons, who always try to destroy Brazil, gain a lot of influence. And that's true. The conservatives in Brazil like to praise America, but that's not true. There is a book about that, The American Delusion, from Eduardo Prado, and this book was banned by the Republicans. And if there is a president that was against the system, not aligned with Washington, was Jânio Quadros. He was forced to resign. And he said, I was forced to resign by strange forces. What the hell is strange forces? Well, you are all fans of Alex Jones. You know what's that. After that, we had a lot of presidents, but I will mention the most important, João Goulart. João Goulart was a communist, and he tried to implement a true communist, aligned with the Soviet Union regime in Brazil. He was prevented. He was prevented by the United States, General Lucius Clay. But look, that was not to save Brazil from communism. American Freemasons know how to think in the long term. And they knew that communism would never catch in a Catholic country such as Brazil, a strong Catholic country. Back there in the 60s, 95% of the population were devout Catholics. Today, then we had a military coup to prevent the communists. You can read about that in a book, The Suffocated Truth, Verdade Sufocada, of Colonel Ustra. He was a good soldier against terrorists and communists. But a military regime was implemented in 1964. We had the TFP, the Tradition, Family, and Property movement, that would never let communism to be implemented. We know the military dictatorship was a brilliant plan of the American Freemason to create an economic superstructure, interventionist, developmentist, Getulist superstructure that the left progressive Democrats of today use it to expand their own powers. And they were also useful to purge the name of the right-wing movements in Brazil. After the military dictatorship, being right-wing was the same of being an incel. You couldn't get any girl if you say you are a conservative and right-wing. You were demonized. Well, let's look to the military dictatorship. The first one was Castelo Branco, but he was not totally aligned with the United States, so he was killed. You're starting to get what happened to Bolsonaro, don't you? He was killed by Costa Silva and the CIA. It must look like an airplane accident. And the dictatorship started, actually, with Costa Silva and his Institutional Act number 5. Then we lost our economic freedoms, the few that we had, a lot of interventions. And a considerate amount of civil liberties were also lost, but not in the same amount as the extreme leftists used to say. There was a lot of communist, Marxist, Leninist, terrorist movements, exploding bombs, menacing civilians, trying to implement a communist dictator such as in Cuba. They were a menace and they must be dealt with force. That's true. The military dictatorship was bad, but the social democracy we live today is much worse. Well, a prominent figure in the dictatorship was Delfim Neto, a leftist economist that resembles a perverted pig. We had artificial growth during the Médici government, but it was artificial. Then we had, of course, a crisis, as the Austrian economics always warn us. And what was the measure of Delfim Neto? A maxi devaluation of the exchange rate with indexation of every economic indicators that haunts Brazilian economy until today. And Delfim Neto is in the scenario until today. They don't die. They are like a plague. After the dictatorship ends in 1985, we had a president, elected president of Brazil, which example should be followed by every president. He died before taking office. Then we had Sarney and Collor with their crazy economic plans. Hyperinflation once again, price control. That was perfect to be exploited by the Washington Convention. And they put in power a puppet of the New World Order called Fernando Henrique Cardoso. In my opinion, the worst president after Getúlio Vargas, even worse than Lula. Fernando Henrique pretended to combat the inflation as he was a Brazilian version of Gilmar Schacht. But what Fernando Henrique really did was to deplete our reserves, our strong currency reserves, making the Brazilian economy vulnerable to foreign shocks, foreign crises, such as the Asian crisis in 1998. And then the interest rates plummeted to the skies. Another crisis. And we have the dot-com crisis in 2001. Brazil was vulnerable to that as well. The Nasdaq crisis. What happened in 2002? The goddamn syndicalist called Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. A thief, a criminal, a murderer, a communist, a terrorist. 16 years of Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Labor Party, dictatorship. Social democracy is a dictatorship, even worse than the military. He wrecked Brazil morally, economically, socially, and politically. PT, the Labor Party, and the Social Democratic Party, they are blades of the same Leninist scissor. And the screw in the scissor is called PMDB, the Partido of the Democratic Movement. They all came from the MDB, the Democratic Movement, with origins in the dictatorship. Back there, we had two parties, ARENA, more center, and MDB, left wing, composed by terrorists. By those Marxists, I said, they exploded bombs, they kidnap people, they assault banks. And all the political leaders of these parties are terrorist, deported communists such as Fernando Henrique, José Serra, Lula, Dilma, José Dirceu, Mário Covas, big political leaders, Montoro, Mota. And they are in power today, for Christ's sake. We have no right wing in Brazil. Lula got it right. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva got it right when he said there is no political right left in Brazil. And Bolsonaro got it right when he said that the mistake of the military dictatorship was to torture the communists and not killing them. That's why they are wrecking Brazil until today. ARENA, the center party against MDB, evolved into the PDS, which evolved to the Progressist Party, the PP, which was the first party of Jair Bolsonaro. But as the name says, they are progressists. There is no political right. The first purge of the political right was with Getúlio Vargas. The second happened with the redemocratization. And now we have Dilma, that was literally a terrorist. We have Aloysio Nunes Ferreira, another robber, bank robber, train robber, terrorist. These people. Aloysio Nunes is from the PSDB. And we have now Michel Temer. Who is Michel Temer? Another Freemason, which promoted a final blow against Brazil with the immigration law. He opened Brazil to the Islamization, the same problem that Europe is facing now. We always said, poor Europe. They're being invaded by Islam. In Brazil, we have common robbers, we have a lot of poverty, but at least we don't have Islam. Now we have. The Islamic population is slowly growing here. Saudi Arabia is financing agents to Islamize Brazilian people. It's a minor problem for now. In the long term, it's a big problem. And the candidates, neither of them are saying a word about this. And it's Michel Temer and it's Lula to blame, because our foreign policy was always of support to Hamas and another terrorist groups in Palestine. We are the only Western country to have a Hamas embassy, and that happens during Luiz Inácio government. That's the kind of shit we are facing today. Well, before entering in the actual elections, let's look to some Brazilian aspects.